Hello, everyone, and welcome to Classical Revolution here on Idagio. My name is Rachel Fenlon, and this is my weekly series in which I chat with guests in the classical music world, people who inspire me, people who are pushing boundaries as musicians and artists, and chat with them about what inspires them, what risk-taking and rule-breaking feels like in classical music. Today, I'm joined by Simone Osborne. Simone began her career very early as one of the youngest winners of the Metropolitan Opera National Council auditions. She subsequently joined the Canadian Opera Company in the ensemble studio at just 21, performed title roles with the company, and she returns regularly as a guest. She performs leading roles across North America. She's performed at houses such as Vancouver Opera, New York City Opera, LA Phil. She's toured with the Metropolitan Opera. She's now making her home in Frankfurt, where she performs leading roles with Opera Frankfurt, most recently as Norina in Don Pasquale. Simone is one of these great artists who's equally at home in recital. She's performed tons of recital tours, and most recently she has a beautiful album, actually, which you can all listen to, which features German repertoire like Mozart and Schumann, and also a Canadian world premiere. On a slightly personal note, I've known Simone since I was 18 years old. We did undergrad together at UBC, and she's one of my dearest friends. So I'm really thrilled to have her on the show today. Please welcome Simone Osborne. Hi, Simone.
Hi, dear friend. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm all the better for seeing you and having something to put lip gloss on for.
Yes. 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 Oh, it's so nice to have you here on the show. I like to begin, I would just love to ask you, have you tell us about your sort of earliest introductions to music and whether there are any kind of particular musical memories that jump out to you as really important or...
Sure. So I don't come from a particularly musical family. My family likes music and appreciates music, but there aren't any professional or even sort of hobby musicians in my family, really. And we did listen to a great eclectic sort of world of music when I was growing up in our house, but not much classical and definitely no opera. I think the first full opera that I heard was, at the university that we both attended about 6 months before I entered university. As a music major, as a young soprano. So opera came to me later, but I do have distinct memories of sort of like cross-Canada car trips and with my family where there'd be, the Beatles playing or Ella Fitzgerald, Joni Mitchell. So it was an eclectic musical upbringing, but I didn't get introduced to classical music until my teen years when I started taking singing lessons. And it just so happened that luckily I had a friend who is a mutual friend of ours who introduced me to her singing teacher, who was a classically trained mezzo. And I, like I said, never heard opera, never heard art song, never heard, I think maybe I'd gone to the symphony as a kid with my school. So it wasn't until I met my first singing teacher, Lynn, that I was introduced to opera. And my dad bought me a compilation album, a CD of Maria Callas when I was, I think, about 16. And I'm going to age myself here, but I had a Walkman or a Discman. I also had a Walkman, but I had a Discman and I put the CD in the Discman, I remember, and I was in my bedroom listening to it. And as soon as the first aria started, something happened to me. And I remember thinking, like, I can't be in this bedroom right now. I have to move, like I have to go. And so I put the Walkman or the Discman on, I put on my coat and I just started walking around my neighborhood. And I listened to that CD, I think like 4 times over, just from beginning to end. I had never heard anything like it. I'd never heard a human voice do that. And I mean, talk about a perfect introduction for a would-be soprano, Maria Callas, all the greatest hits. And I had no idea what I was listening to. I was listening to French opera and I was like, listening to Gluck and Mozart and Puccini and Verdi, and I couldn't talk to anyone. I couldn't look at anyone. I just had to be walking and listening to this music. It was a transformative experience. So basically from that moment on, I think I went into my next singing lesson and said, who is she and what is that? Because that's what I want to do. And then, the rest is history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a story. I never knew that story. Wow.
Yeah.
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 And throughout the years, you've now really sort of found a repertoire that you're at home in, and that I'm curious what the trajectory to that has been like for you. Has it sort of been trial and error, or carefully planned, or what? Yeah, how have you sort of grown into certain repertoire?
I think the interesting thing for me that I've only realized recently is that in the beginning of my career, I was like 21, so it was the beginning of my career, but it seems so overwhelming to think of that. A lot of the decisions I made were actually sort of fear-based. I remember being told, especially after the Met competition, don't do too much too soon. Don't sing repertoire that's too big. You're going to break yourself. You really need to learn what you're doing and how you're doing it. You do it naturally, but you need to learn the building blocks. And so there was like so much fear associated with even moving forward in any direction that it was hard to make any decision that didn't seem really safe. And I'm grateful for that, because I do think had I not had cautious voices in my corner, I probably wouldn't still be singing, if I'm really honest with myself. But that led, and truly that did lead to the smart stuff to do. So lots of Mozart early on. I didn't do a ton of Baroque music, which I kind of wish now that I had, because I actually really enjoy singing it now. And I wish I had been able to sort of delve into that earlier. And lots of recital and lots of song repertoire. But then, as crazy as it seems, I was doing things like Gilda at 23, I think, and maybe 24, and Juliet and Romeo and Juliet, the Gounod, shortly thereafter, or actually I think in the same season. But I was always careful about, that was always under really watchful eyes and cast by people that I trusted. So my first Gildas, I never thought that I could do that. But it was Alexander Neef, who was at the time the head of the Canadian, in fact, I think is still the head of the Canadian Opera Company, but also the head of the Paris Opera. And he knows voices better than most people I've ever met, almost anyone I've ever met, and knows the repertoire. And he gave me recordings of lighter voiced, younger sopranos that sang the repertoire that he was asking me to sing. And he would always tell me, I don't want you to sing it like Anna Netrebko, or I don't want you to sing it like Leontine Price or Caballé. I want you to sing it with your voice. And these are people that did things like that, and go home and listen to it and see what you think, see if you can do it. And so when people like him had faith in me that I could do repertoire like that in a sort of controlled, safe situation. I was a young artist at the time. It was a company that I knew, a coaching staff that I knew. I was at home. Those were, I say that I was so fearful, but I guess I did take on most things that were presented to me. The things that I didn't take on were things like Lucia, Traviata, Mimi, in Bohème, those kind of things that come up a lot. Even Micaela's I didn't take early on, because I just knew it wasn't really my voice. And then I remember when my first Lucia came up, and it was sort of happenstance. It was supposed to be something else. In fact, it was supposed to be Pelléas and Mélisande. And I was supposed to sing Mélisande for the first time, which I was so excited about. And I'd prepared for like a year, just learning the notes and making sure. And then all of a sudden the season had to switch, and they asked me if I would sing Lucia. And, I was under 30, and, Mélisande to Lucia is, you could not have two more different soprano roles, I don't think. And that was the first really difficult repertoire decision that I had to make. But something in my gut just told me that I could do it. And I had a really great teacher at the time, and we had just started working together, and it was really working. And through that leap that I took, I really believe that I learned to sing the top of my voice in a different way than I ever had before. And in a way that, like, I had to count on it every morning, every afternoon, and every performance, and really sustain it all night in a way that even Gilda doesn't really require.
Yeah.
Because you've got to get to that mad scene at the end of the night and have lots of spin and, you know, height for days. And if you're not singing right from pretty well the beginning, the first notes out of your mouth, you sing those duets in the first and second acts too heavy, you're in trouble. So that taught me a lot. And yeah, a great teacher of mine said, well, I knew it was either going to kill you or cure you. And sure enough, she was right.
Love that.
So, yeah, it was a combination of really having smart people in my corner, and then honestly operating out of fear for a little while, which I wouldn't recommend, but it's probably better than operating out of an abundance of abandon at 21.
True. And I mean, at early 20s, who isn't really operating out of fear? So, you know, I think it's really, no, yeah, it's interesting to hear, you know, how much of it is serendipitous and how much of it is just sort of taking a risk on something like Lucia.
Yeah.
And I was also curious to talk to you anyway about this role, because I mean, so this is one of your signature roles, I would say, although I think
I love her.
You've had one production of it so far, but exactly. And you totally shine in this. And yeah, I would be really curious to hear about your process tackling this kind of role, which is like such a titan in the repertoire, and such a dramatic ask as well as a technical vocal demand. What was your process like learning this?
Well, learning it, I mean, I didn't have all that much time to learn it. I would have loved to have a full year or even more than a year to learn it. But I did have some really dedicated time before the project where I wasn't I wasn't on another contract. So I could really dive in. And obviously, you know, that's the kind of piece that you just have to take to your teacher and your coaches. And so I did that. I went to New York and spent, I think, a solid 3 weeks working with my coaches and my teacher. And that was really helpful and informative, but that is, especially for a character like Lucia, is just like the first of the building blocks, you know? And that was really a piece where I learned that in order to have freedom on stage in the moment, so much of it had to be rehearsed physically more than I had ever done before. It was a piece of advice that I got from a director when I was doing Ballo, when I was singing Oscar. And it was a really physical staging. And I actually was not a boy in this production. I was a girl. So I was doing it all in heels. And I'm the kind of person that loves to like try new things and test it all out and really go for it on stage, even in rehearsal. And he pulled me aside at one point and he said, Simone, I love that you're in the moment and you're trying new things, and that's great. And he said, but at some point you have to lock down like 90% of what you're going to do physically, because if you don't, you actually won't know what breath you have underneath you. You actually won't know what you can or can't do on a certain night. And vocally, you need that foundation of like your body knowing actually what you're going to be doing. And from that will come more freedom. And it didn't sink in on that show, maybe because Oscar is not Lucia vocally. So I could kind of still get away with, you know, trying lots of different things every night. But with the Lucia, I realized quite early on that I was going to have to pace myself physically and rehearse it such that nothing felt like pacing. And I actually had freedom to play. But if I didn't really work out all of the physicality of it, there was no baseline for me to know, actually, you know, I can take a couple more steps up the stairs, you know? It was things like that, you know, the difference between taking 3 steps up this steel staircase or 5 could mean the difference between making it through that phrase or not making it through that phrase. And so I really learned to pattern physically, everything that I needed to do for that role. And that has served me really well in all of the soubrette repertoire I do, and all of the, Verdi heroines that I sing. No matter what, that has really helped me. And it actually does. I thought it would stifle my creativity or my feeling in the moment. And it actually encourages that and allows for more of that. And then, there's always this interesting dynamic of director and singer when you are performing a fully staged opera. And of course, the conductor comes into that too, depending on how they feel to a lesser or sort of bigger degree in terms of how much say they want to have. And luckily, I was working with a director that I've worked with before, who's a very sensitive person in terms of working with the artists that he has in front of him, rather than just working with people who are singing these characters. So he knew me well, and he kind of knew that to get the best out of me, he should just give me some freedom, and then, tell me what worked, tell me what didn't work. But that was also the beginning of this realization for myself too, that I had for a very long time as a young singer subconsciously wanted the audience to like me, which I think is really quite common for artists and performing artists. And some people really fight against that and couldn't care less. And, some directors, especially over here in Germany, want people to hate, or don't want people to hate it, but want people to react strongly to it.
Yeah.
And I wanted them to react strongly. I just wanted them to react like in
strongly to you. Yeah, sure.
Just please let them think I was good. And I didn't realize how much of a hindrance that was, and how much I somehow really believed that judgment of me was connected to what people thought of my character on stage. And so I was always trying to find the really likable bits of a character and bringing them forward, which is sometimes important, especially I think when you're playing the villain. But I really kind of had to strip away all of that expectation of the audience to feel for Lucia and to love Lucia. And I just had to play, what I had in front of me, the text that I had and the relationships with these characters. And because also, if you're so concerned about what the audience is thinking of you, even subconsciously, you're not completely in the moment with the other people on stage and what they have crafted as their character, and what they bring, personality wise and to dramatically to the encounter or to the scene. And so that was the time that I really kind of learned to let go of that, because I had seen so many old productions of these gorgeous old sopranos who just looked heavenly and beautiful in this mad scene, and impossibly like untouchable, and the lipstick is perfect and the eyebrows are and to me, that's not what's happening for her in that moment. At least it wasn't in this production. And so it was important for me to be able to be ugly and scary and passionate and too much and unlikable, And of course, in the end, it turns out that people see more of themselves in that than they would have seen in a perfectly framed, likable character. So that project freed me in a lot of ways, and both vocally and dramatically. And it came at a time in my life and in my career, I was sort of nearing, I guess I was maybe 28 or so, and out of young artisthood and out of that expectation that, you sort of want to please every coach and every conductor and every teacher that comes through, and really deciding who I was as an artist and what I had to say about a piece. It was the very beginning of, it's sad that it took that long, but really the beginning of me taking ownership of what I was putting out there, of course, in, conjunction and collaboration with the artistic team. But yeah, that was a big, big learning moment and piece for me. And I can't wait to do her again. I was supposed to do it again and it got canceled. I'm supposed to do it again and it'll may get canceled. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, I hope that there are many Lucias to come because there's just so much there.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, there will be for sure.
Aww.
It's so great to hear about that journey with her, and I'm really glad we talked about it because it is such a significant role for you in so many ways. So
yeah.
The constant discussion for us in the classical music world is sort of this interplay between innovation and tradition. And I'm so curious to hear your thoughts on where you feel you fall on that spectrum, and whether that shifts for you and how.
Well, I think to this point, I have been sort of on the more traditional side of the spectrum. I mean, I've always commissioned new work for myself. I've always pushed to do recital work. I'm always interested in doing new repertoire, although it's not presented to me as often as traditional repertoire is. But again, I mean, I would love for that, not for that to change necessarily, but for there to be more opportunities to do new work because I do love it. However, I feel like I've reached another point in my career too, where as much as I love the traditional dynamic, and there's nothing better than a big Sitzprobe in a room full of amazing musicians and the director and the conductor and all of your cast of characters together doing a big, wonderful traditional opera. I am finding myself very interested and like almost infatuated with the idea of having some more creative control over what I'm putting out and over even like producing of projects and choosing the team that I want to work with and even working more collaboratively, like challenging the dynamic of director, conductor, and then just like plebeians that do what they're supposed to do. I'm happy to be a vessel for other people's artistic ideas and dreams and visions. I love that part of my job, but I'm also feeling pulled to create myself and work with people that I really love and adore, and with people that I think have something new and interesting to say. So, I mean, one of the gifts and silver linings of COVID is that I've really been able to dive into projects like that and start like the beginning of producing of projects that I want to do, repertoire that I want to sing, and engaging a lot of female conductors, female directors. Not that I'm anti-male directors or male conductors, but I think it would be great. I've worked with more female directors in Germany than I ever did in Canada. And I've worked in Germany, a quarter of the time that I've worked in Canada, or lived in Germany a quarter of the time at least. So I think it's really time for more of our stories to be told by us. And I have felt in the past that there's a distinct difference between, for the most part, between crafting a female character with a female director and crafting a female character with a male director. It doesn't mean that one is better than the other, but the perspective is definitely different. And the best male directors allow you to bring in your own personal experience or your own feelings about things. So yeah, I do find myself really interested in taking the reins a bit and taking a bit more control over what I'm spending my time learning, what I'm spending my artistic time investing in. So hopefully there'll be some more of those projects to come post-COVID. Yeah. And, I have to say, I don't think this is going to be a clear, like reset button once we reach herd immunity and once the whole world can open up again. I mean, we'll all jump for joy, but I don't think that companies are just going to open up and do seasons as if nothing happened. There's, especially in North America, there's going to be a huge, I think, like pausa, sort of like people figuring out what they have money for, who they need to rehire, what, it's just going to be totally crazy. I mean, administrations have been put on leave and choruses and entire orchestras. It's not just going to be a flip of the switch and we're all just back to normal work. So I think now more than ever, especially for young singers, it's going to be important for us to create our own opportunities.
Mhm.
And I think that there's more respect and understanding for that now post-COVID. Like a lot of the reason that I didn't do, I mean, I always fought to do recital work, but that's still very traditional. I always fought to do it even over opera sometimes. Sometimes my manager would be like, well, we have this opera contract, which is worth 3 times more than this concert tour. And I would say, I'm doing the concert tour. Like, that's just so important to me. And also I promised my mentor, Marilyn Horn, that I would never, ever give up on recitals. And I would like actively encourage the art form because she was such an amazing, I mean, she just loves song singing and recite the recital world. And gosh, was she ever amazing at it. But yeah, I think there's more respect and there's a bit of a more open-mindedness about even these smaller kind of indie opera companies and singers self-producing and creating things themselves because we've had to for almost a year, you know?
Exactly.
So I think it's going to be, that is freeing and we should all take hold of that and do what we can with it because now more than ever, I feel like those floodgates are open and I think it is important, especially in this short term, while big companies in North America, I think Europe will be fine, especially the fest systems, because they're still basically running. But everybody else, you know, if the option is do grand opera or do nothing, I'm not interested in that. You know, I want to do everything in between. And I think now is the time for all of us to grab the bull by the horns and do that and just take it. I mean, if this pandemic has taught us anything, it's that we can only count on ourselves, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I think also it's fair to say the industry can only really count on the artists at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So if we do take the reins, we have a lot of sort of control over what might come in years. Like it's an opportunity to actually shape things.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the smaller companies and the people that are willing to take risks, of course it's a smaller fishbowl. And so one can say, well, that doesn't translate exactly to a big opera company. But it's often these smaller companies or these artists that are doing things that are really political or really challenging the status quo and really taking risks. And it turns out that audiences love that. And they're drawn to that, sometimes in a way that they're not to a traditional production of Bohème, you know? And so I think that the big companies can learn a lot from that too, but we have to be willing to invest and to create those pieces of work so that the bigger companies can go, oh, actually, they had a full house for 2 weeks. Yeah, it was 300 seats, but I mean, that works. People are interested. People that are coming to Bohème are also coming to that. So good to know.
Exactly. And that they have a faithful audience, they subscribe to the seasons. I also think it's good. It's interesting because you mentioned specifically North America, but I think also that this is something that like Europe could somehow benefit from as well, because we do have these fest systems. I mean, I live in Berlin where we have, 4 opera houses and everything in between. But coming from Canada and seeing that and seeing these kind of what we would call indie opera, which my Berlin friends have never heard of.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's not because it's the necessity, it's different. So it's interesting that you bring it up because it's something that's been on my mind, in a way advantageous for us as North American artists because we're used to that. We're used to seeing it. We're sort of used to accepting it even.
But I think that that's only started in the last few years because I don't even remember, like when I finished university, what is that, 10 years ago now, more than 10 years ago? I don't remember there being all of these. I mean, there was a new music. I mean, if you take the biggest musical city in Canada, Toronto, there was a new music company. There was an early music company. There was sort of a ballet opera, early opera company. 2 of the 3 of those still exist. But now there are like 2 or 3 really established, sort of, one would say medium-sized new opera companies. And then there's this whole wealth of indie opera companies, which have been born out of necessity. You know, when you have one major opera company in your town, in your city, which is the biggest city in the country, and then you have half a dozen other, which do 3 to 4 operas usually a year, and the biggest company at that point did 7. I mean, there isn't space for all of the artists. And so these artists created the space that they needed to work and to make music. And all of a sudden it's like it's a meaningful dynamic in that city, and people that subscribe and pay, $500 Canadian a night to go and watch Bohème or Traviata at the Canadian Opera Company also pay $30 to go see, some, Copernicus or something, something that they don't know what it's about. They've never heard it. They don't even really, they've kind of heard of Vivier, but they don't really know the composer, and they don't even really know what they're signing up for. But they're signing up for the work of this company because they've seen or heard of other interesting things that they're doing. So I think something that was born out of necessity has really sort of established itself in that city. And I think, if there is not a time where space to make music safely is a necessity, like any other time, like now, I've never experienced it. So hopefully, a whole bunch of us will just kind of take things into our own hands and produce things that mean something to us, and the world will take notice.
Yeah. And I love that you talk about self-producing and the importance of that. And that's also something we have to learn, right? Because it's not necessarily, we weren't necessarily taught to be self-producing artists.
No.
We went to the same university, so.
No.
Yeah, so that's definitely a journey. No, it's it's an interesting time to question everything and ask ourselves these questions and sort of think more objectively about how we want sort of our art form to go.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I find it really, actually essential at this point. Like it can be something as simple as choosing what you want to sing in the practice room. Like this is the first time since I was 21 years old that I have a stint to not sing what's coming up, not learn what's coming up, not practice, not relearn something that I want to, get rid of old muscle memory in because I sang it at 23.
Yeah.
So this is the time that the other day I just brought out Schumann Lieder and just started singing through things that I sang in college and things I haven't had on a recital program in a decade. And the freedom in that, in the choice, I think, especially in North America, we are seen, and I'm sure here too, we're seen as sort of these artistic creatures that just get to do whatever they want and, make music the way they want to and whenever they want to and choose whatever. And so much of the traditional operatic, classical musical world is so structured. You don't get to choose what you sing necessarily, most of the time. You don't get to choose what you sing. You don't get to choose who you're singing it with. You don't get to choose who is choosing the tempi of what you're singing or who's choosing the costumes, how you look, how what the creation of the character that you have to become. So much of it is taken out of our hands and out of our control.
How your voice will feel in a year from now when you've agreed to the engagement or what have you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that breaking free of all of those constraints and just saying, no, actually, this is what I want to sing. This is the way I want to sing it. And it's not about a control or thinking that you know better than everybody else. These are the people I want to surround myself while I make this music, from colleagues to creative team. That for me has been, even just in the formation of these projects, has been so emotionally energizing and freeing. And I love what I do more. And I love going back to the traditional stuff even more. And I appreciate that I just have to show up where I need to show up and when, and with my music learned. I appreciate, that I don't have to do all of the emailing and creative, storyboarding and stuff behind it all. But so there's this wonderful partnership between the two where I just feel so, there comes a time sometimes where you resent a little bit the lack of power and control over what you're doing, where you're going, especially when you have a private life and people that you want to see and you're missing birthdays and Christmases, and then you get to the gig and it may not be the most enlightening, life-changing gig of your life, and you may have a challenging colleague or a challenging conductor, and all of a sudden that love that you have for what you do is challenged. And so this way, I think having both of these pieces in my life has made me appreciate the other so much more than I ever did.
Mm. Beautiful. Simone, I would just love for you to tell us a little bit, because I know this about you, but something that you're also passionate about is teaching, and you're really, really an educator. You've done summer programs at the university, and I was just wondering if you could maybe just share a little bit about why you're passionate about that, and sort of what your experience is like working with young singers and that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I'm really honest about it, I think that my life was changed and probably saved by music. I'm the kind of person, I was a little bit of an outlier in school. I never had a big group of girlfriends that, we had sleepovers and told each other everything. I never really fit anywhere, and got bullied mercilessly through elementary school and high school. And if I hadn't found choir and musical theater and the school plays and the drama club, I don't know where I would be, and so for me to work with young people, whether they become musicians or not, in this summer university training program that I was on the faculty of, you're working with late teens and then undergraduates. And some of my favorite work was with those young teens, and some of them did not have the basic instrument that is required to have a career in music, but the effect of music on them and the way that it connected them to their peers, and the way that they stood taller after a week of this music camp when they came in like trying to be as small as possible, was life altering for me, and I saw myself in those kids. So it was sort of selfishly like trying to help the little girl that I was, that felt totally alone and like I didn't, fit anywhere and didn't have a purpose. And then, the truth is that I just love not so much the science behind, but the building blocks and the breaking apart and the constructing of a voice. And so working with the older singers, that's really inspiring, and turning them onto repertoire that they haven't heard about, or hearing something in their voice and thinking, no, actually, I think, this kind of repertoire is for you. German repertoire could be really interesting, and having them have that aha moment with their voice where it just clicks and something makes sense. That's really, really special to me. And, I think while I'm so grateful for the really impactful, really successful, in some cases, like world famous mentors that I've had in my life, they couldn't start teaching until their careers were finished. So they were just too busy. And I totally understand that. And I wouldn't take away any of the recordings that they made in those years from like 30 onwards for them to go teach at a summer program. But it is, I think, quite impactful for a young singer to hear what it's like for someone 10 years ahead of them rather than 50 years ahead of them. And I think especially here and now today, it's so important for us to sort of give back to that next generation, because everything is changing so quickly, so that's been really, really wonderful for me. And it's another one of those things, like it just fills my cup to work with these young singers, and they have some moment they figure out how to sing off the staff, and it's just like their mind is blown, and you go into the practice room and first of all, you're grateful. You forget that you had to learn to sing off the staff. You forget that,
Yes.
when the first time you sang a high C, it was like, you couldn't believe it, or I couldn't, at least.
I couldn't. No.
Yeah, you forget how far you've come, and you get so entrenched in the little details and not being enough, and not being able to perfect something. And then you work with these young people who just have such a boundless love for it, and you go, oh yeah, I had that. I still have that, actually. I still have that if I'm not so hard on myself,
Right.
Yeah. So that the teaching does as much. The truth is, it's not a selfless venture. Like I have learned that it does as much for me, if not more, than I do for those young singers.
Oh yeah.
It's just, it's really important to me. And to me, it's a respect factor for the mentors that have come into my life and the people that have given me so much of their time. As just this young Canadian girl who is trying to do it. So I feel like it's sort of passing on a lot of the wisdom and knowledge that I gained from them. And then, with that sort of modern twist, because I'm still right in the thick of it. Well, not currently because COVID.
Perhaps for any of the kind of young singers watching right now, what advice would you give them? Would you have any? I mean, just like, one, if a sentence comes to mind, I don't know, it just came to my head.
If right now in this current moment,
yes, exactly.
If you're not going to go into an insane amount of debt, stay in school as long as you possibly can. This is not, I don't think this is the time to be trying to enter the young artist world or even the professional classical music world. Invest in great coaches, listen to all of the great singers and musicians that you can, on all of the streaming services that exist right now. Watch full operas from Vienna State Opera and from the Met and from, everywhere that is streaming what they do, and just like fill your artistic cup as much as you can, but stay in school, because the industry, I think, is going to be topsy-turvy for a while. And we're in a rough spot as, young to mid-level artists, but for young people trying to just enter this world, it's, I think a year or two from now would be much better. And then, there's the piece of advice that Marilyn Horne gave me very early on, which seemed so simple. And now I realize it's everything, which was, I asked her at one point, what do you like? How did you do all this? Like, how did you become Marilyn Horne? Because she's so down to earth. And she's so like, she'd give you the shirt off her back. It seems to me like she's exactly the person that left her town in Pennsylvania and, went immediately and worked with Igor Stravinsky. Do you know what I mean? Like, she hasn't changed. She's just who she is. And, I couldn't fathom, again, this was like right after the Met. And so I was sort of dealing with feeling very much like an underdog and a sort of kid from the middle of nowhere, and was convinced that they'd written the wrong name on the card. It was meant to be someone else.
Simone.
Well, I brought one dress. I didn't think I was going to the final round. Anyone that knows that competition, there are 2 rounds in New York. And I thought there's no way I'm making it to the second round. I'll just bring my best dress and wear it to the first round. So I had to go shopping. But she said to me, I said, just like, how did you even navigate all of it? How did you navigate the doubt? How did you become who you are? And she just said, well, it's pretty simple. There has to be a piece of you, even if it's a really tiny piece some days, that just knows that you can do it. Just knows that you can climb that mountain and that you can, it wasn't even as specific as sing on the world's great stages, but she was like, there has to be a seed of self-assurance, and you cannot completely doubt ever. You just can't. You have to know inside you that you can do it. And it seems so simple. And yet, of course, there have been more times than I can count on both hands over the last however many years I've been doing this, that I thought, can I really keep doing this? Is this really worth doing? Do I really have it in me to get to the next level? Am I even supposed to be here? And her words ring in my ears every time that happens. They're just, even if it's 2 cells, those 2 cells just have to believe that you can do it. And then you have to do all of the work and, be a generous colleague. And, literally, I believe you have to work harder than everybody else and smarter. But if you don't have that tiny little piece that tells you, yeah, you're meant to be here and you can do this, then you're wasting your time.
Yeah. And I love it. It just has to be tiny, because some days it's just this.
Some days it is tiny.
That is all you need. You're right.
Yeah.
I love that. I really love that.
Yeah. Well,
Simone, thank you so much for making time today and for sharing your, beautiful journey with all of us. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I love your series. I tune in all the time, and I'm just, I'm glad to be able to chat with you.
Yeah, and also it's just nice to see your face.
It really is.
I would close with my kind of favorite question, hence the title of the series. How and when do you feel music can be revolutionary?
Well, now you're going to make me cry. I think every time you step into a live performance venue, it's possible. And that is what I strive to be a part of. That is what is like, if I have an experience when I walk into the theater and that happens for me, that magic, it can be life-changing, and it can make you see the world so much more clearly. And sometimes you don't even know what happened to you. You just know something happened to you. And it can be in a symphonic work. It can be in a live recital, hearing one voice with one piano. It can be anything in between, fully staged costume productions set 250 years ago. And you can have an absolutely revolutionary experience. And I don't know what that is. I don't know what the magic in that is. I don't know how that happens. I know that it's happened to me as an audience member. I know that it's happened to me as a performer. Very rarely do I realize it's happening when I'm on stage. But there are moments when you realize that you are part of something that is revolutionizing lives out there that you can't even see in the darkness in those seats. And I don't know how possible it is. I can't remember the last time it happened to me through a screen. To me, it has only ever happened live and in person, which makes me think there's something bigger than just the sounds that are emanating from the orchestra or the person, and the people that arrive that evening from whatever they've just come from. But I think that every single time live music is made, it's possible. And you just have to have the right pieces come together. And then that lightning strike, which comes from, I don't know where, the music, the performers, the people who have shown up, and there's that magic moment. And it can be life-changing. And then it's revolutionary in little ways every day. I mean, I don't know how anyone would have survived this quarantine without music, without iTunes or Spotify, or, it has that, music has an ability to change your entire day. If you wake up and you're listening to a playlist of positive, fun singer-songwriters, and all of a sudden you feel like you can take on the world.
Yes, or go for a run.
Yes, exactly. Or it'll make you go for a run that you haven't done in months. Yeah, I think it can be revolutionary in tiny everyday ways. And then it can be fundamentally changing and shifting. And that is what makes everything worth it. All the other stuff that we put up with to do this. And I think for people that feel that way about classical music, we will all survive this pandemic somehow, because it can't be any other way, It just can't.
No. Yeah. Thank you.
I love you, friend.
I love you too.
Nice to talk to you.
Are we allowed to say that?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, we can do whatever we want. Simone, thank you so much.
Of course.
For making time. And thank you everyone for tuning in, and look forward to seeing you all again next week.